Aw.
Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between. Have you ever wanted to read a book that has as much incest as it does magic? A family line so convoluted that it leads to nothing but twist in the mind as to what to make of it? Where people ascend to heaven for being Well, have I got a book for you, 100 Years of Solitude, and we'll be discussing it right here on the Gentrified Gentlemen podcast. I'm Maddox Burr, and these are my associates.
I'm Christopher Whittington.
I'm David Seville.
And I'm Jackson Moorhes.
Now it's time for me to read off every single f***ing buen dia.
Do you just want to do like a just like wrap them off just like that?
I'm gonna have to like pull out as much like Eminem as I can out of like I need to harness like white boy energy.
I mean, you got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Dude, don't even count. Don't
Eight,
even
nine,
count.
10.
Don't even. Please don't count. I don't-
That wasn't even half.
All right, I'm going to be running down the Buendia family real quick. First off, we got Jose Arcadio Buendia. This is the patriarch of the family. He gives birth to Jose Arcadio and Colonel Relial Buendia. Bro is chasing immortality. He's married to Ursula Iguaran, a long-lived matriarch of the family, breadwinner, obvious W. She lives to be 120 years old. He's also good friends with Melquiades, a gypsy who comes in and teaches him about alchemy. Colonel Reliano Buendia is his second son, and he wages 22 wars, has a bunch of kids, nice little goldfish, marries a child. Jose Arcadio I is just a big buff sailor dude. He goes off with the gypsies at the start of the book, comes back, marries his adopted sister. We'll get into that shortly. Rebecca Buendia is adopted. She comes from supposedly Ursula's second cousins. She eats dirt and drywall a lot, and then she causes a guy to kill himself, but that's not important. Amaranta Buendia is the third actual child of Jose Arcadio Buendia and Ursula Iguaran. She gets very jealous of Rebecca's first love, and basically she rejects love throughout the book. After that, then we have the 17 Aurelianos, which is all of Colonel Aureliano Buendia's kids, because a bunch of women wanted to have sex with a war hero. Aureliano Jose Buendia is the child of Colonel Aureliano Buendia and Pilar Tenera, who is not really important because she just kind of gives birth to people. Aureliano Jose Buendia is... Actually, I don't really know what he does. What does he do?
I think he died.
Hold on, I'm gonna look this up real quick.
There are too many f***ing characters. Do you guys think any of the characters were femboys? To be honest.
Dude, actually, yes. That one of the 17 Aurelianos, literally, they described him as a femboy.
Okay, so Aureliano Jose Buendia, he liked Amaranta, I'm not actually quite sure, but he goes off with Colonel Aureliano Buendia for a little bit. Arcadio is the child of Jose Arcadio Buendia and Pilar de Nenra. It's not important, just know that both of the brothers belong to the same woman. Arcadio does not know his true parentage. He leads the school for a bit, and then eventually becomes a dictator before being shot. He marries Santa Sofia de Piedad. She gives birth to Remedios the Beauty, Aureliano Segundo, and Jose Arcadio Segundo Buendia. Remedios, her beauty is like so cool that people literally die over it. She ascends to heaven. Aureliano Segundo Buendia is twins with Jose Arcadio Segundo Buendia. And they're twins, they're interlinked at all times. Aureliano Segundo Buendia goes on to be like this really like gluttonous man, and like he has a relationship with a woman that he's not married to named Petrocotes, and they run like a raffle ticket thing with farm animals together. But he marries Fernanda del Carpio, who is this very beautiful woman that he meets during a festival, who's a very strict Highland aristocrat. Aureliano Jose Arcadio Segundo Buendia is basically, he goes and studies in Melquiades' workshop like most of the Aurelianos before him. Fernanda and Aureliano Segundo gives birth to Jose Arcadio Buendia IV, Renata Remedios, otherwise known as Meme, and Amaranta Ursula Buendia. Jose Arcadio Buendia IV is sent off to be a priest, comes back, fucks kids, then is killed by kids. Meme, she has a love with this dude who is symbolized by butterflies. Then the dude with butterflies is killed, and she's so sad that she walks off and is never seen again. But she does have a child, who we'll get to in a bit, and then Amaranta Ursula Buendia is the final child, and and she is also sent off to school in Europe, but in a similar vein to Jose Arcadio Buendia IV. And she marries Gaston, and then they come back towards the end of the book to Macondo. Aureliano II is the child of Meme and her lover, and he sets up shop in Melquiades' workshop and is alone for the decent portion of the last act of the book. Then eventually Amaranta Ursula Buendia comes back, and he loves her, and they have sex, and they have a pigtailed baby. Gaston leaves them. Amaranta Ursula Buendia dies in childbirth. Aureliano III has a pigtail. They cut it off. The baby's dead, and then Aureliano II kind of goes off, and the book ends. All right, I think I want to start this general discussion off with the connecting it to the main title of the book. It's obviously titled 100 Years of Solitude. So what do you think that theme of solitude really implies, and how is it expressed throughout the novel? What do you guys think?
Could I chip in on this?
Go for it.
Of course, go first.
Okay, so to me, at least one way I saw it expressed in the novel, solitude to me seems like it was defined as possibly isolation from the family. Because a lot of the times that we saw members of this insane family die, most of them died alone, such as Colonel Aureliano, Rebecca, even like Jose Arcadio. Whether it was by their own volition or something weird happened to them, a lot of them die by themselves after an event that isolates them from the family. So I just wanted to know what you guys think of that.
I took a completely different interpretation of it. I sort of saw the solitude of them locking themselves up with the ghosts of their past, being that Jose, like the first Jose, he died tied to a tree, tortured by the ghost of his past. Colonel Aureliano, he kind of carried his solitude around with him, physically in the 10-foot circle, but also he locked himself up with shame, the shame of the 32 lost wars and whatnot. So I kind of figured that their solitude was just isolating themselves in their minds with their mistakes.
I also want to kind of agree with Christopher on that. And I think a lot of the characters in this novel experience isolation and loneliness because of social norms, as well as just unfulfilling relationships that were thrown upon them. And I also feel like that kind of ties into where solitude as a family is one thing that's what I took the title as, is I think the common theme of incest throughout the book also feeds into that idea of solitude, because when you're alone with only your family, who else is there to, I guess, reproduce with other than family?
Well, I mean, there is the neighbor down the street. They just kind of ignored him.
So I guess
I think what's interesting, but playing off of that, what's interesting is that Macondo grows really big throughout the story, but even up until the very end, we still see them. We see it staying in the family. So I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I also think that really correlates with the Latin American setting, because Latino families, that culture is very they're very family centric. They have a lot of familial ideals. They really cherish those bonds and whatnot. So I think that personally, experiencing solitude within the family, as well as just the family isolating itself, I think that presents a nice dichotomy as to why they are, let's call it, intriguing as they are.
Completely unrelated side note, just how big do you guys think Macondo got? Think about it. They got a railway station, a lively downtown, but at the start they had 20 huts.
I'm thinking Macondo is about the same size as Fresno, and honestly the Buendia family just sounds like the average Fresno resident, as someone who's lived in Fresno.
As someone who's visited Fresno, I can confirm
it's Fresno sized. So
it's probably relevant to the Civil War and whatnot, just because dominant position within the greater swamp area.
Real quick, Jose Arcadio Buendia, the patriarch of the family, is a main contributor in where I found solitude, just because of him being, for lack of a better term, just so weird to the rest of the community, and him just being an outcast kind of ties into this idea where it's just when you go against the grain, you're all alone.
That's interesting, because he's also conversely the founder of Macondo. He's very integrated within the general structure. He's very well respected. And even after he's gone insane for years, when he eventually dies, the streets are filled with flowers. People very much respected him. He even made peace when the new governor came in and whatnot, despite his age. So I believe personally that presents a very interesting dichotomy.
Actually, I want to bring this up. I noticed that with each incursion of the outside world, it was worse than the last, because when they started, the outside world first started invading, first the Catholic Church, then the war, foreigners, the life that they had was being destroyed. and the place was becoming unrecognizable to the founders. They were at one point stated to be like the most dominant family in the entire place, and then over time they just kind of faded away into nothingness as Macondo became more of a stranger to its founding ideals. Because we could try and tie that to the way that Jose, like the first one, he was weird, but early on in the book, I don't remember him being alienated like he was later.
Actually, going off of what you said, Chris, I think it's interesting when you put it like that the book is titled 100 Years of Solitude, because if it's referring to Macondo, if anything, it's the opposite. It's the story of how it grew out of solitude, or how it was approached by all these people and changed completely.
I think it carries multiple meanings, honestly.
Yeah, there's a
Because-
lot of different like correlating points, I think. Like you have the community of Macondo, then you have the family itself, and you have the various ways it's expressed between all the different members of the family.
Then I want to ask you in particular, Maddox, do you think in this book do you think solitude is portrayed as a negative thing or a positive thing or something in the middle?
I think it's honestly exclusively portrayed as a negative thing.
I think
I
it is
can't
too.
really muster any sort of idea to showcase when community and whatnot wasn't valued at a higher place than as opposed to solitude, being valued. I mean, Aureliano II, right? The last Buendia, he locks him inside of his workshop, and he stays there for years and years and years, just until eventually Amaranta Ursula, second to last Buendia, comes back, and then they eventually, that solitude leads to them, ending the bloodline. For those who were upset or concerned by, or maybe familiar with the scenario I just presented between Amaranta Ursula and Aureliano II, I'd like to give you a word from today's sponsor, Doppelbanger, to make sure you and your sibling doesn't end up twinning in bed. So in this book, there's a lot of incest, and that's why I want to bring up this product, really, really get it out there. Doppelbanger is a new startup ancestry finding product that can help one make sure you and your sibling don't end up twinning in bed. Doppelbanger is not liable for any mental trauma induced or any pigtail removal operations. Please use Doppelbanger responsibly.
That
I'm
was
so
wonderful.
glad Doppelbanger can now pay off my pigtail removal
You know
with
what?
that ad money.
Please,
But
please use code Gentrified Gentlemen.
Use
code
code Gentrified Gentlemen in the
15%
Use
off.
code 100 Years of Jose.
Yeah, 100 Years of Jose. That'd be great.
100 Years of
My
Jose.
paycheck. But just to hop away from that whole cacophony, I want to kind of talk about religion in the context of this book. And as someone who studies a lot of Catholic and Protestant texts, I think this book was very interesting for me to read from that, lens. And so many of the fundamental biblical stories are referenced in 100 Years of Solitude, and some of the characters can be interpreted as allegories of significant biblical personalities. The origin of Macondo and its first Edenic days of purity are described in the narrative, which continues until its catastrophic end with a purifying flood in the middle. Jose Arcadio Buendia's search for knowledge led to his downfall, his loss of sanity. And I feel like this ties to the biblical Adam and Eve who were banished from Eden after eating from the tree of knowledge. And the entire book serves as both a commentary on human nature and a metaphor for human history. On the one hand, their narrative, when applied to fictional characters in the Buendias, invokes a great deal of melancholy. The Buendias, however, personify loneliness and inescapable tragedy, as well as the elusive promise of happiness, as described in the Bible. In the Bible, which, I don't know if you guys have ever actually gone through and read it, but a lot of the stories told throughout
I have not.
are meant to be taken in as metaphor. And what I believe is that it's philosophy for the common folk, right? And so a lot of these stories that people see and are, they're dramatized and turned into plays or, ideas and whatnot, they're actually just philosophical ideas meant to be interpreted by the common individual. Were there any moments throughout this story where you thought that the book kind of used magic as a way to tell a metaphor rather than just magic being magic?
I just wanted to say, one thing I can think of that I think goes to support what you said, David, is that I think it's really interesting how you can interpret some of the things that happen in the story through that lens of being allegories for something else. For example, when Remedios the Beauty just ascends to heaven, it's a very weird thing that happens, honestly, but I almost feel like in a similar vein as the Bible being interpreted allegorically and as metaphor, I wonder if this book kind of tries to do the same thing, maybe without necessarily being as interpretive, but more literal.
And
And then
as someone who practices religion, I that was something that or stuck out to me in this book was their use of, I'm just going to keep using the word magic. To me, instead of just being like, oh, this is happening, was more so just like predecessing what was to come.
so I just want to ask real quick. Do you think that like a metaphor for the original sin could have been like Jose killing that one dude over the joke about him not being able to get his up?
I would say yes. I think it all kind of ties back to biblical stories. Throughout the Bible, it's constantly stated that anger is what causes hardship. And so the anger of one individual can be the downfall of everybody. And I feel like that is like one of the main things that happens throughout this entire family tree is the ignorance and the anger of one individual kind of over everybody else.
That's actually, I just thought of something pretty crazy.
I was
But on my copy of the book, I just wanted to say, maybe you're thinking the same thing, I don't know. But on my copy of the book, there's a review here by William Kennedy of the New York Times, and he said something which before I read it, I was like, that's interesting. But after what David has said, is maybe like, huh. He says 100 Years of Solitude is the first piece of literature since the book of Genesis that should be required for reading for the entire human race. And now with that religious lens, I'm wondering if that is what he's referring to in that statement, possibly.
But yeah, no, I just kind of brought that up because my main thing between those two situations was that in the original sin, right, Adam and Eve immediately started suffering, but in this book they actually encounter an era of prosperity at the founding times of Macondo.
And I really enjoyed that Adam and Eve comparison because it got me to think about it a little bit more. And I've always been a personal fan. I don't really know how to discuss of the story of Cain and Abel.
Mm-hmm.
And given that those are the first sons of Adam and Eve, and that there's obviously Jose Arcadio and Aureliano, who are the first sons of the so-called Adam and Eve in this book. And in that book, it's just straight up, Cain kills Abel just with a club. But in this book, Aureliano's action, the colonel's actions, eventually do cause Jose Arcadio's death. It's implied that he was killed as a political assassination. And although the colonel does eventually die, he is forced to somewhat walk the earth lonely for a great portion after that, if that makes any sense.
Actually, I find that comparison like super interesting because in the same way when he handed off power spiritually he was killing him because he set all the events into place that eventually led to his death. He didn't kill him directly, but he did it indirectly. That's an interesting parallel to draw to Cain and Abel in my opinion.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna agree with Christopher on that one. But so I want to make a little literary connection here. Ooh wee.
Oh boy.
One of my favorite books of all time is, well, not really a book. It's more so a poem, but it's John Milton's Paradise Lost, right? And if you've ever read Paradise Lost, at the end, the angel Gabriel takes Adam to the top of a mountain and shows him all of human history. And so while Adam is upset at the first sin, he is also mystified with the beauty of the future. And so I kind of want to ask you guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the time, Adam saw the end of the world from the beginning of the world, right? So he saw everything. And even though he knew that the world was going to end and rapture was going to happen and, a portion were going to hell and a portion were going to heaven, at the end of the day, he still was mystified by the beauty of that. And so I want to open that up and say, do you guys think that throughout this book, a similar event could be happened where some of the people in the family were kind of given an easy way out while others were given a lot harder for their punishments and for the things they did? I.e., do you think the morals and the actions of individuals throughout this book gave them severe, I guess, punishments or fates throughout the book?
Maybe interestingly, Ursula, of course, Ursula the matriarch, Ursula Uguaran, sorry, I probably butchered that,
Yeah,
but of course, the original, Um, I think it's interesting that she was one of the longest living. I believe it said to around 120 or something, maybe a bit older
Yes,
than that.
120.
Um, but I find it very interesting that she was kind of like keeping things together for the most part. And despite having a very sad fate where she saw everyone around her die, it's interesting that she was probably one of the most peaceful throughout the whole story.
She
Yeah,
didn't
that's
kind of
true.
see
She
everything.
does. Yeah, she kind of lets things happen.
Okay.
So David, being this whole overlapping lens of religion, it contrasts with like the conclusion I drew. So I just want to ask you, what was your main takeaway about the book?
I kind of saw this whole book as just a very simplified and very like narrowed in view of what the Bible puts out as the story of the beginning of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I've said before, a lot of the like fundamental biblical stories are referenced, and the characters in the Bible are allegorically kind of spread out throughout the book as other individuals, right? And so I feel like with the ending of this book, where you know we kind of have this like reboot where everyone's gone, everyone's dead pretty much, and all of Macondo is flooded over. That kind of reminds me of Rapture, where at the end of Rapture, everybody who has gone to heaven will ascend, and those that are not going to heaven will stay on the earth, and floods will consume them and pull them into the depths of hell.
My main takeaway, like ignoring the little end bit, is that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And my single biggest reason for this was whenever Jose Arcadio Buendia, when he went like bad shit and he was raving about how like, oh, every day's Monday, everything is the same, nothing changes.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring up that he was the only person throughout the entire book who made an active attempt to remember history as it was and not hide in it, shame, or romanticize it. And the example for that would be like whenever the village forgot during the insomnia plague, and then they also forgot during the banana plantation massacre. There was only one person who remembered the banana plantation massacre, and they didn't believe him. But then contrast that to the insomnia plague, and Jose made a machine to like write down their history as it was. And in that process, he tried to break down the cycle of forgetting history, and symbolically he broke down his familial home, the product of his first mishap, the source of his curse. And subsequently, he was tied to a tree where he spent the rest of his life unable to escape the ghost of his past. So I think that the single biggest theme in this book was those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.
My interpretation, like kind of like how you were just saying, definitely like falls in the middle. Like I can see how both religiously and just literally, not repeating the mistakes of the past, while also like all of these, like I can definitely see how the lines are drawn there. Um, One thing I did want to point out, which was what something Chris mentioned. He talked about the labor union massacre, and one thing I wanted to point out about that is that Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the author of the book, he wrote about that massacre. All the people in the town square getting shot down by miniguns on the roofs, I believe. That was an event that actually took place in his hometown when he was 6, quite literally.
Yeah, I definitely think that the child that was saved in that scene is probably like a symbolism for him. But I think I agree with everything that was previously stated in my own personal thoughts. But I just wanted to add on that this was probably very much intent by the author. But I view this whole book as just an allegory for the development of South America, and how that has progressed over time. It starts out as this lush, wonderful, untamed, very magical and mystical sort of area. As things start to settle down, things look good for a while until eventually uh, political divisions bring about rebellion and civil war, and that engulfs the whole region.
Normalized violence is a very prevalent thing throughout the book. And I think looking at this book through both a religious aspect and also just like looking at it through a logical aspect and just looking at it historically everywhere, like there's a lot to learn from this book depending on what lens.
I I don't think there's any singular way to interpret this book, especially towards the ending, which I think is a great way to say that I think it's time to leave this podcast behind. Kind of approaching the time limit. You guys
Well, there's one conclusion I think we can all agree on. Don't have sex with family members.
True. All right, do you guys want a kid with a pigtail? I didn't think so. We're gonna call him Piggy. Porked up.
Porked up is
white boy.
crazy. Porked up?
I'm porked up right now.
No. Okay, you better sign us off, Matt.
I'm hogging my
Let's sign off Maddox immediately. Maddox after continuing the bit.
Okay.
That was, yeah.
This is
that was good. No, that was good.
That was good.
That was the first episode of 100 Years of Jose. We're signing out. Peace.